I live, Bob, there's a neighbor, maybe a quarter of a mile, half a mile from your house, that has these, they're probably 4 or 5 feet across.
Wow.
They are just monsters.
You can see really nice spiny individuals here. And of course, you find critters when you're roaming around. Our two local species of horned lizards that are around in the lowlands around Belen. The nice thing is I've seen several of both. Saw a lot of them last summer, and I've already started to see several of each this year. So that's encouraging.
And the 4-inch round ones out there, like probably one out there behind that mesa.
Oh yeah, the one on the right, that's the bigger species. They still are. There's some large ones still around.
And I got a lot of lizards in my area.
Next location, we're going to take a little ride up into the Manzano Mountains. And on the way up, we'll end up at Capilla Peak. You can actually drive up to that peak, and there's some interesting things even growing way up high. So you can see, compared to Belen, I've included quite a few more different things that we're going to see in the general area. I've kind of listed after each one. You'll notice gives you kind of an idea of the distribution of some of the different species. A couple in particular, the Viridiflorus and the Escobaria vivipara are quite widespread, covering many, many states. And there's where we're going to ultimately end up, on Capilla Peak. In a kind of series Viridiflorus, this is what I call the low elevation form. These are growing out in the Tierra Grande development, if you want to call it a development. It's that big, giant expanse of land right off of Highway 47 as you go south towards Highway 60. And there's a whole network of dirt roads that wind through the area. And there is a pretty significant population of this species out there. But they tend to clump like this, where Viridiflorus in some locations is more singular, but these also have those real long, pronounced central spines. Typical Viridiflorus flower. If you can stand getting down, get your nose up close to it, they're very lemony scented. Usually on the first day that they're open is when you have the most, the most intense fragrance. But they'll last for several days, and then they're gone. Not a very big flower. The flower opens up to maybe about 3/4 of an inch across. We'll get an idea of the stem size and so forth. They usually about 4 to 5 inches tall when they're fully hydrated. You can see these are in full growth mode. If you look at the right-hand picture, the center there, the new spines starting to develop. And then they will shrink down fairly significantly in the winter. This area gets quite cold in the winter as well. And many of these plants could potentially be old enough to have experienced the 2011 freeze when they were in the negative teens. Then we get up into the mountains. Anybody that's ever been up into the Manzanos, it's a beautiful range. The road up to Capilla Peak is really quite nice, and you can get up there. There's places to hike around. Steve and I went on a couple of occasions, and we got a chance to take a climb up into the fire lookout tower. The gal that was up there, maybe loneliness or just a need for speaking to other human beings, spends quite a number of weeks up there basically in solitude looking for fire. So that was kind of fun. You get a real great view from being up there. But we found Viridiflorus at 9,000 feet up on near the peak, near the summit. And there was areas along the road that had these south-facing rocky exposed areas, and we weren't sure what we might find. And lo and behold, here's all these Viridiflorus. But if you can recall the ones we were looking at previously, these are all very close and flat to the ground. They're much less spiny than the other ones, but they had an interesting form. You'll see the picture on the right. Those are more of the juveniles, and they were quite white in color, and they seem to kind of migrate to the normal coloration in the spines. There was a lot of oddballs in this spot. If you look at the left photo, the plant on the right looks like it has two eyes on it. That is dichotomous growth. It's actually forming two branches within the same stem. But there was even more oddballs that we'll get to. These ones form these really gorgeous little tight clumps, and they were very localized in really specific open exposed rocky habitats, but quite a lot of them there. And these could potentially be buried under, quite a lot of snow for long periods of time in the winter. More oddballs. We found that crested plant on the right, and that was, anytime if anybody's been exploring, if you find a crested plant, consider yourself extremely lucky because they're very rare in nature. It's just a mutation of the growth form where the meristem turns into that fan shape that you see instead of a central growing point. But if you look at the plant on the left, there's, many pieces of that plant are all wanting to form crested growth. So why that's happening in this population, no idea. There's speculation in comparison to another plant in Texas that grows in a very localized place that there could be some degree of inbreeding within the population that's causing, some mutation in the growth, since the plants are all kind of consistently interbreeding with one another instead of in a larger population. We come back down off the mountains a little bit into kind of serious Fendleri country. Anybody that's seen those around the area knows they are quite striking in terms of what, a flower. Fantastic yard plants, easy to come by. You can find those at some of the nurseries, I think, in town. I haven't explored too many of the nurseries yet, so. Typically a grassland plant. They will get up into the mountains, but you don't find them as much into the higher elevations. But you can't beat that color. I mean, it's just spectacular. And if you get close enough to them and watch them for a while, a multitude of insects will fly in and out of there. I'm sure Elliot can probably expand on the numbers that might visit a flower like that.
That's the same color of the local booking too, isn't it? That purple.
Yeah.
Likewise.
A little lighter. Big flowers. Some individuals can have flowers approaching the 4-inch diameter range. So you get quite a striking showy flower with this plant. Super cold hardy. There's not any cold in Albuquerque or the general area that will do these guys any damage. Now we have the more mountain form of the Triglochidiotis. You'll notice these guys have a more open, cushiony type stem and much fewer spines. The spines are farther apart. The areoles are spaced more widely. These are both growing in the 6,500, 6,700 foot range on the east side of the Manzanos. The thing you'll notice about we have winter growth form on the left and spring and summer growth form on the right. You'll notice the plant on the right is a much brighter green. You'll see the new spines developing at the top and the stem is more hydrated and robust. Where you see on the left, the stems tend to kind of accordion down as they get rid of all the excess water in preparation for the winter rest. You'll see the plant on the right, you'll see those pleats as they've stretched out on all of those stems. But same species as the ones around Belen. It really is quite a variable species, but they are all Triglochidiotis. Again, they have that just gorgeous flower.
Steve, up on the west section.
Oh yeah, yeah. You get up into the higher elevations on the west side of the mountains are there.
Right about PJ like this.
Exactly. They tend to like to be in elevation. They're a little, and you're gonna find them more in the mountain areas in pine forest and so forth. This will give you a real good idea of how they really shrink down in wintertime. A plant like that will be, double that same distance in height as it gets hydrated during the spring and as it gets into summer. These were growing in, in a transition area right before you started to get into pine forest in a PJ area here. You'll see that plant was just kind of parked down at the south side of the trunk of that shrub there. What they'll do is they'll be in those trees where in high summer they'll have some filtered light and protection from the intense sun, where in the wintertime then they'll be much more exposed to be able to take advantage of those warmer temps. I've seen these plants back here where it's been snowing and freezing, and the stem will actually freeze solid to the touch. You can grab the stem and try to squeeze it, and it'll literally be solid. But they've gotten rid of all the available or most of the moisture in the cells, and everything else in there will not rupture when it freezes. One of the more extreme forms, this was one I just threw in here just to show another different growth form. This was from the Rio Rancho area where they were growing in a really strange habitat out in just open, completely exposed situations. So thus smaller stems and very tight clumps with very heavy spination. We found coccineus, which is the other claret cup, up at a really high elevation. They're very common down in the lower elevation, so we were kind of surprised to see these at 9,000 feet. But again, they were also restricted to really rocky, exposed areas where they can maximize the amount of sun exposure, specifically in the winter months, but also, in the summer, so they have can take advantage of those temperatures. I would expect these plants have a fairly short growing season at that elevation. Real rugged habitat where they grow. By growing in the rocks, there's a lot of radiant heat in the wintertime, a lot of thermal storage in the rocks. We get back down into the grasslands, and we have Echinopsis dasyacanthus, sometimes known as intertextus variety dasyacanthus. A very difficult plant in cultivation, but where they grow, there is just hundreds of them. And
Why is it difficult?
They don't like moisture. They have a very delicate root system. They want to die in a pot almost.
What if you put them outside?
Probably a little bit better. They don't transplant well. From seed, the seed will germinate, but you have to be extremely careful with the water on these plants.
All that's true. I've killed a couple hundred of them.
You keep praying and hoping that they're going to get up to size, and they don't. But yet you see, like the plant on the right is forming new stems and was about 6 inches tall and just happy as it could be where it's at. Oh, easy. They're the first cacti in the area to flower. Most of these will start flowering in March here, depending on how warm the temperatures get. And they start flowering when they're quite small. That plant is about the size of a golf ball. They have a slight, Steve, remind me, it's kind of a coconutty, a light coconut kind of fragrance to them. And then they'll have that really pink stigma lobe that you see in the middle. And some individuals, that can just be this absolute neon electric pink color. They really like growing in rocky areas in grasslands, and they will hide. You'll see on the left, right in dead center, you've got all that grass kind of condensed in there, and then you're looking for that little round object kind of parked in the grass there. And again, on the right side, There are places right along Highway 60 where you go just east of the Highway 47 turnoff, and the right-of-ways are just covered with them, just hundreds and hundreds of them. Another plant of the region that can be locally abundant, but only in some places, is Mammillary myacantha, one of the pancake mammillaries, if you will. They generally, in most times of the year, if it's dry or cold, they are just flat to the ground. If they get significant summer and spring rain, or by spring, summer rain rather, they will kind of form a slight dome shape as they really take on a lot of water. But for the most part, they're pancakes. Super cold hardy. They've got a large tap root below the surface, and they will pull down to almost below ground level in times of extreme drought or in winter as well. Not the showiest plant, interesting nonetheless. If you're a real cactus geek like myself, you find redeeming qualities in most cacti.
Hey, Steve, biggest one I found was almost 5 inches long.
Oh, yeah. There's a place in the Big Bend, the Davis Mountains, north of the Big Bend. I've seen them there almost the size of a dinner plate. They can get really giant. What temperatures? Oh gosh, these will go negatives without even. Yeah, they just scoff at
How
us.
far north do you go?
They just get barely over into southeastern Colorado, but all through the whole east
You don't
side
go
of the
up to-
state. And
Colonies of Nebraska or anything?
no, myacantha doesn't. The other mammillaria in the area that can be extremely difficult to find is rhytii. They're kind of an enigmatic little plant. We often consider a lot of cacti to be, have long lives. I've had many conversations with Steve and others about this plant, and we've come to the conclusion that it's a fairly short-lived plant. Short-lived being in the 10 to 15 year range, maybe. They're quite soft-bodied, so they can be very susceptible to, different environmental conditions. But they really will expand and contract given moisture and temperature. These were in the Priest Canyon area. Either of these were not much bigger than about 1.5 inches in diameter. They were trying to get going, but it was going to be, this was last summer, and we were going into a dry summer. You'll see the flower buds kind of hiding in the middle of both of those. We went back on a subsequent trip, and all the buds had aborted because there had not been any rain. They really tie their flowering to summer rainfall. If we get a significant monsoon, if you go to a habitat where they grow, within 2 or 3 days of a significant rainfall, you will have a big flower show. I was in the Manzanos eons ago, exploring around the 4th of July when there had been a lot of rain, and they were in flower en masse where the old JFK campground was. And I just couldn't believe how many plants there were, literally just hundreds of them all over the place.
Which could be found pretty much.
Exactly. And when they do flower, you get quite a show. Singular plant. Steve donated this photo here, and this was one individual, and we've got 6 flowers on it. They're a really large, showy flower. Another interesting thing, and I don't have a photo, unfortunately, when they do make a fruit, the fruit is about the size of a grape and completely distorts the body of the plant. It's this just grossly oversized fruit by comparison to the size of the plant. And all the tubercles will just completely spread apart to accommodate this really large fruit.
They're easy to propagate.
They are easy to grow from seed. They don't seem too fussy in a pot. If you grow them in a landscape, you'd want to put them where they're going to get some shade during the summer, because you will cook them.
The edible?
The fruits,
Fruits.
I've never tried them.
All of them are done. Some are in all kinds of sweets are done.
Are they?
Then we have our Escobar vivipara, another common species in the area. Great flowers, though. You can't complain about that. Iris mentioned that, we got one for her at the rescue. There was a few of those scattered about in Rio Rancho, and she was thrilled that it had all these flowers all over the stem.
You know, Steve, when I was 10 years old, the biggest flipper I ever found, I would say was 70 heads. I was thinking up in the sand of my house.
I'm not,
Biggest one I've ever seen.
well, they can get big. That would be impressive. Anybody knows me knows I'm not much of a prickly pear guy. Is Dave here tonight? I would apologize in advance for the lack of opuntias. But Trichophora is kind of an interesting one because it's a real hairy plant, and there is not a rigid spine on those pads. They have these wiry hairs on them. It's still not something you'd want to, clap between your hands or put in your back pocket, but they, maybe 5 to 6 inches in
Pretty
diameter.
tall.
Yeah, they're not real huge. It's a woodland plant. But as time goes on, they will, if you look at the bottoms of each of those plants, they get really hairy. And in some cases, I've seen plants up near Taos that had extremely long woolly bases around the plant, almost like a long beard coming down off of the stem. It's a typical yellow flower for an opuntia, but you would certainly make an attractive yard plant. Another extremely hairy individual. This was in one of the side canyons on the west side of the Manzanos. We were there earlier this year. You can still see a little bit of remnants of snow on the ground. So this guy was pretty much laying over, still in mostly winter dormancy, but extremely hairy. And none of those spines are rigid. They are all just those, wiry hair spines.
They still hurt?
Sure, they.
I haven't tightly gripped one enough to know, but they're still gonna poke you, but you wouldn't get in a full-on impalement like you would with another prickly pear.
And they still have barbs on them.
Oh, yeah.
Steve, are they a dry fruit or? Dry.
They're a dry.
If that's on a country, will we still have pocket?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Anything with glochids, you can sweep that off. And kind of give you an idea of some more of the habitat in the area. I think the Manzanos are an underappreciated place. Everybody likes to go to the Sandias, but the Manzanos are just fantastic. There's roads all through the range, and lots of opportunities to see great plants and lots of hiking. One of the really interesting places in the region is San Isidro, kind of more on the north edge of what I like to call central New Mexico, or at least around here. You access this about 20 odd miles northwest of Bernalillo. And this area that we are able to explore is just on the edge of the reservation up there, but there's a lot of open BLM land. And conveniently, you can park right off the highway. You do have to go through a barbed wire fence, but it is all accessible hiking and just loads of space to go through. But some new plants are going to pop up that you see on the list there that we did not see around Belen or in the Manzanos. That gives you an idea of where we're at. Down in the lower right corner is 550, and that would take you back down to Bernalillo and then to I-25. And then, of course, you see where San Isidro is listed. That takes you up into Jemez Springs. So you go a little west of the town of San Isidro, and there's that little bend in the road, and that's where you can hike all through that area. The cool plant to see up there, well, they're all cool, but one of the cooler plants to see up there is Tumea papricantha. And they're actually quite common in this location. We've seen a number of them. I've been back in Belen about a little over a year now, and I've been back to that place about 6 times already. It's just one of those places that you just feel that draw. But every time we've gone, we keep finding more and more of these things. The plants at this spot are pretty small. A big one was thumb size, but the average ones are, on the order of 1.5 inches tall approximately, and maybe 3/4 inch in diameter. What fascinates me the most about these plants is their unique adaptation to their habitat. They're commonly called the grama grass cactus because they grow really closely in association with species of grama grass. And if you look at those central spines, they are virtually just a blade of grass. They do have a little bit of sharp tip, but nothing that's going to hurt you. When you get them into a grassy area, they really disappear into their environment. These, you see the developing fruits on them. On the left, and that one, when they're growing out in the open like that, they tend to be a little easier to spot. And then if you look at the photo on the right, you'll kind of see a little bit of grass starting to get close, or the plant is growing in close to the grass, and it starts to really blend in with its environment. One of the shaggier ones, if you will.
What's the level of camouflage, particular weed?
Just their evolutionary development to growing where they grow. I've seen them actually chopped off the tops from cattle. And well, we don't have any javelinas around San Isidro, so.
And cattle aren't native, so there would be any help.
San Isidro.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Steve?
So you can see that, yes, sir.
Some of these off of the Middle Lake Road.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they stretch from about, I think they get close to you in Los Alamos, don't they?
Yes, they are.
And they do go all the way down, mostly following the Rio Grande. They do grow in White Sands National Monument. I've seen them there growing literally in the pure gypsum sand. They are around the Salt War Memorial in Texas. And there's been a recent discovery in northern Chihuahua, Mexico, that was a real exciting thing for all of us cactus geeks out there. They kind of grow in little colonies. The seeds are distributed mostly by ants or wind or rain. The fruit is a dry capsule when it's ripe, and when the fruit wall disintegrates, the seeds just will kind of spill down around the plant. So you'll have areas where you've got little colonies, and there might be a wide expanse in between those colonies where there are no plants. Young plants kind of start, the seed will get dropped down into a little crevice in the soil, in the rocks, and then they just, they'll spend some time mostly at or below ground level before they develop enough tissue mass to be able to rise above.
Seems like it's quite afterwards.
Absolutely. And even smaller seedlings, the little young seedlings like this are quite striking in their appearance. It's almost like they're born with their big boy spines and they're trying to grow into those. Then you get some extreme forms where, the spines are quite long in comparison to the stem. But just, they're just absolutely fascinating to me.
They also grow at Old Brook, Arizona.
Yes. Actually, I've been to 3 places in there. So they're in. This is kind of a general overview of their habitat. You'll find them predominantly on flatter ground. I've seen them in isolated spots in the left side of this photo. And then if you get up on the top of that plateau on the right, they're actually quite common, but I've rarely, if ever, seen them on any much of a slope. They seem to need some stability and you know, a little deeper soil. You have a Canisterius coccineus that comes back into play in this location. It's a hotter, more arid environment. I think that has a lot to do with the development of the much longer, shaggier spines that you see here compared to the mountain forms. Really striking flowers. This one was interesting. It had those really bright yellow stigma lobes. This one was growing underneath a juniper tree, so he's not quite as spiny as the other ones that were in more exposed rocky environments.
What's that one?
What's that?
Say that again?
Canisterius coccineus. It's the other claret cup besides the triglocs that are around there. Then we start to run into Sclerocactus parviflorus. These can be common in some areas around San Isidro. This location here is unique in that if you've ever driven through San Isidro, as you pass there, you'll see a really enormous wash on the south side of the road. In a section of this wash, there's these kind of gypsum hillocks, or if you will, that kind of rise above the channel. And lo and behold, there's all these Sclerocactus growing, you know, in these potentially fragile areas that could be eroded away. But some of the places seem to be pretty stable because there was really large plants and lots of them. They have a hooked spine on the end. If you look closely at the plant on the right, it's another one that is a real booger to grow in a pot. They do not like to be very wet in the summertime, especially in a pot. They will tolerate summer monsoon, of course. But when you know, plants in nature versus plants in a pot is just two radically different concepts as far as the plant is concerned. Really cold hardy. They like to be wet in the winter. They love when you get a lot of snow. They really wake up when there's been a really wet winter. Tough from seed too. The seed has a really hard coat on it. They like to go through freeze-thaw cycles in nature to break that seed coat. Another thing you can do in cultivation, if you take the precautions, is use concentrated sulfuric acid and soak the seeds for about 6 minutes, and that will degrade that seed coat enough to where you can actually treat them like a normal, if you will, cactus seed to get them to germinate. But then once you get them to germinate, then the fun begins of trying to keep the thing alive. But they make tons of seed if they get the right amount of winter moisture. You see the plant on the right, the entire crown of the plant is just covered with developing fruit. So I mean, you'll get 1,000 seed on that plant alone. It's also like the Tumea, where the fruit is a dry fruit and will disintegrate over time, and the seeds will just kind of spill in and around the plant. So they're another colonial type plant in that respect. That's the wash that I'm talking about, and you see the areas where there's some vegetation. Those are little uplifts within the wash channel, and just in this particular area, there several of these little areas with the vegetation. There was quite a number of Sclerocactus growing on the tops there. It is, yeah. We did see lots of recruitment. You'll see in the left panel some youngsters kind of growing there, and then in the right side of the panel, it cut it off, unfortunately, but that you see an area where you had water that would come hit that little hill and start eroding it. And on a number of occasions, we've found the skeletons of Sclerocactus that had been washed off their perch ended up in the bottom of the wash, completely free of the soil, and obviously perished in the sun. the Brusonia clavata that's there, you'll see chunks of that plant already starting to fall over the side of that. So with enough force and time, that little hill could be potentially washed away. One of the rarer plants at this location is Escobaria missouriensis. Not common in New Mexico at all, but you get over into central Texas, into central Oklahoma, even up into Kansas, it can be quite common. This population is scattered individuals, not really much bigger than a quarter. There are verified reports that it does grow up along the Canadian River Basin up near Roy and Mosquero in the northeastern part of the state, but I have not been up to see those yet. They're another species that kind of expands and contracts between winter and summer and, wet and dry periods. And you'll see in the right panel, you've got two plants in there. And as they've shrunk down, dust and such and other crap is kind of covered over them. Now, what will happen when that plant gets sufficient moisture is it will expand up out of there, and then some rains might wash that all of that debris off of the plant. The photo on the left will give you a really clear indication of how they expand and contract. As you see, this plant has started to withdraw, and you'll notice the soil has retained that depression or that rim around where it was previously when it was above soil level. They grow in sandstone-derived soils and in a lot of cracks. This particular area up the hill from where the Tumea grow is a big conglomeration of sandstone formations with these big slabs of sandstone and a lot of cracks filled with soil in between them. And that seems to be where the plants like to grow. Gives you an idea of what the habitat looks like. It's kind of scattered juniper, some peach, some pinon in there as well. But you'll see those like in the foreground there, that's just a big solid slab of sandstone. And then as you go back into the photo, you'll see where it kind of breaks up and you've got areas where there's cracks and such. They're not the easiest plant to find. You do a lot of back bending stump, slumped over kind of thing when you're looking at this stuff. We stumbled on this little family growing out of a crack here. Sadly, on subsequent trips, about half of that little cluster died. The ones on the right side of the frame, no telling why, because the other pieces are still alive. So that could imply that those are all individual plants rather than one single plant from a singular root system. But they had flowered quite well, it appears. So, they just can kind of eke out a living in these little cracks with little pockets of soil.
They grow in Missouri? No.
No.
So why do they got that Missouri River? Oh, okay.
The Missouriensis name comes from, they were discovered in the plains west of the Missouri River.
Okay. We're about more or less North Dakota. Oh, really? Okay.
So this will give you an idea how hard they can be to find. You're looking in these cracks. You'll see in the left panel, right about dead center, you'll see one. And that's the only one in that frame. But on the right side, and I don't have the definitive count, but there's more than, there's, I believe, 3 or 4 in that picture. I see one down in the bottom middle. Then there's one just kind of 45-degree angle up to the left of there. And then there's 2, no, there's 4, because then there's 2 straight above the single one growing right next to that rock. These would have been most likely in late winter, given the fact that they're also shrunk down in the soil. They are easy to grow. They're not fussy in a pot. They do like a little bit of depth in the pot to accommodate the root that they have.
Nice flowers, please.
You'll see the fruit developing there on the left. They can actually hold the fruit in most cases from one season all the way to the next. A lot of times you'll see plants in flower that have fruits from the previous year's flowers. And you'll notice how they just have a better appearance here. They're starting to get moving. This was this spring. And you'll see the sand that's down in between the tubercles is starting to get pushed out as the plant hydrates and expands. Been wanting to catch them in flower, and we finally managed to get a couple flowers this spring. But like I was saying, you'll see that there's this year's flower, and then right adjacent to that is fruit from last year's flower. A lot of times, the fruit, if the fruit is gone, it's mostly because of mice. It is a red fruit, but personally, I don't think it's significant enough for birds to be down at that level to try to get a fruit that's embedded within those spines. So I'm assuming that it's mice that would probably get in there.
You can take all year, right?
I don't think yeah, they can take quite a long time. You can find ripe fruit from one season's flower. They flower in April, and you can, in a lot of cases, find ripe fruit in the fall of that same year, but they will hold that fruit throughout the whole winter time. Not much of I mean, it's a nice little flower. The form that grows in Central Texas has a much larger, showier flower, but you know, they're kind of a cute little plant. I mean, if you like kind of dwarf-sized cacti, except if you're Ralph, who grows them up to the size of a soccer ball.
Was it just regular?
Yeah.
Yes, mice?
Yeah.
What kind of critter is it? It's out in the mesa that has a tail that's about 5 or 6 inches long. And
You know, those like kangaroo rats.
that is, they're all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
My cat knows it.
Pretty little flowers, you know, you see kind of those layered petals there. That plant was not much larger than a quarter. So they do flower when they're quite small. Had one more bud coming along there. Now we're into Albuquerque's backyard, the Sandia Mountains. We're gonna kind of revisit all of these plants we've already seen before, but it's interesting to see them in different places. So you kind of have an idea when you do want to go to somewhere different, you know, you'll know what you're going to be finding. This is at a place called Canyon Estates. It's a residential area that borders National Forest that Steve introduced me to. Great place. There's a good place to park and lots of hiking trails. Our old friend Triglochitiotis, the mountain form, is quite common there.
Might notice that the thing has 3 spines, which is what the name means. Triglochitiotis.
Thank you for that, Sig. And Coccineus also grows there, but what's funny here is the two grow side by side. There is no hybridization because they are genetically incompatible. Even though they bloom at the same time and so forth, you won't see intermediate plants.
These guys are, they say tetraploid, and the twigs are diploid.
Yes, I believe that's true.
Twice as many genes in the or rather chromosomes in
the DNA.
Yeah, the coconates.
Yeah. You'll recognize the guy on the left there taking a photo. And we've got the Coccineus here had kind of a little bit bigger, wider open flowers than what I had seen over in San Isidro. That could be, you know, growing in the woodland. They open a little bit more in the shade than they would in the bright sun. Mantillaria myacantha is present here. We found more of them here than we had in other locations. It helps that the flowers were open.
Peach.
It's not kind of a creamy white. And you'll see the plant on the left is kind of wanting to wake up and get rid of some of that dirt and debris that's kind of been washing over it or blown over it while it's been in its winter rest. When they get bigger, then they don't quite withdraw as flat to the ground as the smaller plants do. So when you see a larger one, that one was about 4 inches across. They're much more conspicuous. But you'll see the two in the right-hand panel are still almost buried. They were on a slope, and so likely as water was running off, it was bringing silt across those plants, and it was gathering up in between the tubercles of the plant. Now that will wash away, of course, as I said, as the plants hydrate for the summer. I find them to be a really interesting plant. They're easy to grow. They will always, like a lot of mammillarias, they have a ring of flowers. It would have been great to see this plant in full flower, because look at you'll notice just loaded with buds. It was going to have a real show probably the following week after we saw these. Mammillaria wrightii shows up here. It's actually a little more common than I've seen them down in some parts of the Manzanos. They get a little larger here as well. But you'll see the left-hand side where they can kind of hide in the grasses. When they're more out in the open, like the one on the right, they're quite a bit easier to see. I'm hoping to catch these guys in flower this summer. Let's hope this weekend's rain forecast actually does something more than just wet the sidewalk.
Yeah.
This area where this plant's growing is near the Piedra Lisa trailhead at about 6,900 feet. And these guys were growing in pinon juniper, and a couple of them we found were right along the drip line of the tree. So they were a little bit more easy to spot because they were not in grasses. They were just in the, in the droppings of the tree. And to give you an idea what you see as you're walking around. Right there, just right about lower mid center. That's the one a little bit on the larger side. That was about the size of a tangerine, which is about roughly what they get to. A little bit bigger in some cases. Then the third species of horned lizard that grows in this area, this is the mountain shorthorn lizard. It's predominantly a species of higher elevation in the woodlands, but boy, a colorful little fellow. This guy, he could have cared less that we were here. He just kind of sat there and posed for a photo, and it was still kind of cool. So, he was, not in any hurry to get moving around. He wanted to sunbathe. He was about 6 inches long. They're the largest local species that I believe they're the largest one.
Only goes around and through inch and over.
Oh, yeah.
For some dumb reason this year, I got a lot of lizards. Way more than I have in the past.
So our last spot is Bernardo and the Sierra Ladrones, kind of an isolated mountain range just to the west of Bernardo. But there is a county road that goes through a ranch out there, and I've met the rancher, and he is absolutely fine with people hiking around. He thought we were nuts, kind of standing there slumped over. What are you guys doing? Oh, we're looking at cactus. He kind of just had this, oh boy, but real nice guy. He's like, yeah, no problem. We said, are we cool to be here? And he was, you guys have fun. This area borders on the Sevieta Wildlife Refuge, just to the north of there. And the road, ultimately, if you take the county road, I have yet to do it all the way, but you can follow this dirt road and it'll turn about 20 miles out west. It turns to the south and it'll take you all the way to the town of Magdalena. So it would be a really gorgeous drive. And the road is mostly maintained for passenger vehicles. It's not a 4x4 track or anything, like that.
Hey Rob, when you get about taking that all the way around from Bernardo, all the way around mountain to down like there is kind of what I call a ridge back area. If you have a long gauge, say 8-bit truck, four doors on it. You may have.
Drag it a little bit.
Area,
Okay,
it's like sharp rock.
that's good to know.
There's no bridge over the Rio.
It'll take you to an old, mining town called Righty.
Yep.
If you go through that part, back.
This gives you an idea where it's at. It's about the turn off, the exit off of 25 is about 16, 17 miles south of Belen, and then you drive out 8-10 miles. You'll see the Sierra Ladrones at the lower center, but it's a wide open grassland for the most part. Lots of cholla cactus, creosote bush kind of comes into play around this area. There's some mesquite. It's an interesting area. You'll see the road there. This is about 6 miles in. There's no fence. There is a lot of cattle activity out here, and we have seen a little bit of damage on the plants. But the cattle roam pretty far and wide, so I don't think we've never seen any one area look like it's just been completely stomped to death. But our old friend Tumea papricantha occurs out there in fairly great numbers and big plants too. Oh yeah, prickly pears, chollas, they will if they're looking for sources of moisture in dry times, they'll get it. You try it and let me know, Richard.
No, I'm not going to, I was like, how do you not get hurt or immunity for not walking? And I get sores in my nose. It's just the way it sits when they do it.
The plants get quite large here. This one is maybe 3 inches tall. I know that doesn't sound like quite large in terms of other things, but they're really robust here.
Are they strictly solitary plants or are they pop out?
They'll only pop out if they have the meristem damaged. I've seen if they get bitten off and not to the point of the whole plant being bitten off, they will branch from that cut. This area is really heavily gramagrass, so these ones really can be tough to find. I've been down here a number of times and I'm always excited when we go and we've marked quite a number of plants with different things like rocks and so forth, so we know to see them again. But almost every single time we found new ones that we hadn't seen on subsequent trips. So there's, it's always fun to see that. They're, it's like a Easter egg hunt for cacti. When you see them in flower, then they're a heck of a lot easier to find. I caught them in flower this year, and the flowers are widest open in the latter part of the afternoon, usually like the 3 o'clock-ish range when it's warm and bright and sunny. When they're flowering, obviously they're a whole lot easier to see. The flowers are about 1 inch across. Plants will generally have at least a couple flowers on them, 2, 3, 4 flowers. But we found a number of new ones at the same old stomping grounds just by the virtue of the flowers being open.
Are they a one-day flower or do they stay for a while?
They're mostly a 1 day, isn't that right, Ralph? Couple, yeah. They'll be open a day, close, open another day. They're not a one and done like a lot of interesting cacti can be.
It's that same creamy white color that you referred to on the other.
Yes. But if you look at this photo, kind of, see if mentally take the flowers out of the equation here, and it would be tough to see that plant. It's surrounded by the grass and kind of hunkered down in there. Our 2 old buddies are present around that same habitat as well, so I'm always excited to be able to see these guys. I was coming back from this location, about a month ago, and I spotted a horned lizard on the road. one of the Texas horned lizards, because a lot of times they'll sit in the middle of the dirt road where it's wide open. They're looking for ants, which is their primary food source. So I stopped, and right beside the Texas horned lizard was a much smaller, younger roundtail. They, had what prompted them to be close together like that, I have no idea, but it was kind of cool to see them together. More indications of the fruits here. That can be a good way to spot them as well. If you don't see them in flower, if you go usually the end of April into May, you'll see plants with fruits on them. They do like winter moisture as well. Snowfall, late winter rain. We had, pretty good rains late winter down in that region this year. So they were really, when they were flowering, they were really quite pumped up. I've been back there since, and they were already really starting to shrink from the heat and the dry conditions. And from eye level, you can see when they are in flower, there's the, it's, calling to you, find me, find me. Pretty big flowers in comparison to the stem. The plant in that picture, I'm guessing, Steve, would be about 4 finger size, something like that. So you see they have a, pretty large flower. As you go a little farther west, there's a big limestone exposure at the south or at the northwest edge of the Ladronis, and it's loaded with these amazingly spiny kind of series coccineas. Big clumps all up and down the limestone. That's looking from another section of the limestone. You'll see the road there, and that's the Sierra Ladronis in the background there, but just, plenty of open space. There's no fences in all this area. You kind of get mixed into BLM and ranch land in here. Just gorgeous country. These plants, many of these are old enough so that we'll have experienced the 2011 freeze when this whole region was in, the negative teens in February. So tough plants. I'd like to try to get seed from this location because that, that would make an attractive yard plant with that really shaggy, dense spination. Same color flower as the typical coccineus. It'll be that red claret cut flower. We found one individual that was really on the extreme end of the spines. The only way that we knew that plant was still alive is you could see, the green stem right there at the top, but otherwise it was mostly completely encased in that mass of long, shaggy spines. The Grussonia clavata, our dagger cholla, as it were, a New Mexico endemic. I just threw this in here because they are arguably one of the most bulletproof of the plants that grows in this part of New Mexico. I think you could incinerate them, freeze them down to extreme temperatures, and they just do not care. They seem to tolerate extremes of heat, and they just thrive. This population here is exceptionally spiny. This wouldn't be one of those, tiptoe through the tulips kind of areas, because those, that is just, they're vicious spines. Yeah.
Maybe that's what they got filled with.
I bet if I threw one at you, it would stick to you like that.
You probably would.
But they grow in really hot flats most of the time. They seem to like deep soils. The stems will root as the plant spreads along the ground. They continue to root in chains of stems. So if the main portion of the plant dies, they will just continue to crawl outwards. They do have a decent flower. It's a typical yellow opuntioid type flower. But if if you've got one of those nasty things, with a lot of flowers open on it, really pretty attractive. I don't know of any nurseries that sell it or want to sell it. They do well from cuttings. So, if you found yourself in a place where there was lots of them, take bolt cutters with you because they are pretty tough to cut. Oh, did they? Okay.
I bought one.
Oh, cool.
I got a clump when we were out in the rancho.
Yes. Yeah, there were a few out there.
They're doing fine.
Oh, yeah. I think you could plant them in asphalt and they would thrive.
But they are definitely crawling.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Never get upright.
No, I mean, don't die.
The end. The best sunset I've ever had in my life. Gary.